session. Step 1. Create interest. Jumpstart discussion. Draw learners' attention to the prompt you wrote on the board. Share how you thought you deserved certain things in your childhood: a bike, a good grade, free time after school, and so on. Invite a few volunteers to share things they thought they deserved and whether or not they received them. Ask, hypothetically, do we think we're entitled to things spiritually as well? Enlist a volunteer to read aloud. Focus on this goal. Review briefly all you've recorded on the Grace poster and challenge learners to continue to connect each week's focal truths to today's scripture. Step 2. Grace beyond fairness. Invite a volunteer to read Matthew 21:16 aloud. Read the opening 2 paragraphs of day 1 aloud and engage learners in discussing how the 2 stories have the same point. Jesus is not operating a classroom or managing a corporation. He operates in the principle of grace and not the principle of merit. Ask for a show of hands to the question, who would consider the teacher and the landowner to be unfair? Read Matthew 20:15-16 aloud and engage the class to consider, what do we observe about Jesus in these words? Share some of the examples of merit-based expectations in the last few paragraphs of day 1, and share your own example if you have one. Step 3. Obedience without entitlement. Invite a volunteer to read the opening of day 2, slowly and intentionally. Ask, have you ever lived as though this statement isn't true? Read aloud the second paragraph of day 2 and engage learners to consider the parallels between obeying all traffic laws and obeying all of God's laws. Ask, what are some elements people expect from society? What are some elements Christians expect from God? Invite a volunteer to read James 1:17 aloud and ask, what spiritual disciplines help us to stay mindful of these good and perfect gifts? Invite volunteers to read the last paragraph of day 2 silently and allow time for insight. Step 4. Grateful contentment. Invite a volunteer to read the opening paragraph from day 3 and the scripture following it aloud. Skim the next paragraph to read Isaiah 26:12 and Acts 17:25. Engaging learners in considering everything we have as a gift from God. Ask, what attitude should we be filled with if we really believe this truth? Read 1 Timothy 6:6, stressing that contentment flows from knowing we are 11th-hour workers. Enlist a volunteer to read the final paragraphs of day 3 aloud. Step 5. The danger of comparing. Ask, for the parents or child caregivers in class, do you treat each child the same in every situation? Or are there times when you might give one child a different response? Direct attention back to Matthew 20 and read verses 9-16. Ask, how does this passage point to the sovereignty of God? What should our response be to his sovereignty? Read aloud the second paragraph of day 4, and then enlist a volunteer to read Romans 9:20-21. Use the paragraph to help learners see that God's sovereignty and grace always work together. When we reject his sovereignty, we reject his grace. Step 6. Grace beyond our efforts. Enlist a volunteer to read 2 Corinthians 1:20 aloud. Use day 5 content, in particular focusing on the quotes from Philip Hughes and John Calvin to help learners understand that all God's gifts to believers flow out of Jesus. Engage learners in considering how we bring our greatest needs to God in prayer. Do we want our own merit or the merit of Christ offered as a consideration for his meeting our needs? Enlist a volunteer to read Deuteronomy 8:17-18 aloud and read the Martin Luther quote in day 5. Ask, how does the grace of God encourage us to continue to labor for God without making our labors the source of his grace? Step 7. Practical application. Live out the session. Engage learners in noting the main points for today's session and writing them on the Grace poster. If you still have hymnals in your room, invite learners to join you in singing Wonderful Grace of Jesus. If not, find the lyrics and read them aloud. Close in prayer.